All right, ready to really get into it today. We're going deep, deep into the war in Ukraine.
Deeper than usual, even.
Way deeper. We've got this recent Associated Press article, and it's got some intense stuff about manpower challenges
Right.
and, what the Biden administration wants to do about it.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
Like we're peeking behind the curtain at like these high-level strategic discussions, right?
Absolutely. What's particularly interesting to me is, how this connects to the bigger picture, right? We're seeing a shift from, mostly supplying weapons
Right.
to recognizing that, hey, you need the actual soldiers, the boots on the ground. And that raises some really, really tough questions, especially, as we're about to see a change in U.S. leadership.
Exactly. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll not only know what's happening with Ukraine's army, but also like just grasp the complexity of like all the decisions being made
Yeah.
and the potential consequences. I mean, for everyone involved, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's jump right in.
Let's do it. The most pressing issue. Ukraine needs a lot more soldiers. A lot. We're talking about an estimated 160,000 additional troops.
Wow.
And even that, some believe, might not be enough.
160,000. That's a staggering number, especially when you think about, I mean, the war's been going on for almost 3 years.
Right.
Can you help me understand, like, why is this shortage so critical now?
Well, I mean, the situation's always changing on the ground, right? Ukraine has managed to take back some territory, that's true. But Russia is adapting their strategies.
Yeah.
They're bolstering their own forces. And holding on to those areas that Ukraine has taken back, that requires a lot of soldiers. For a long time, you need a sustained military presence there.
Okay, that makes sense. So where does Ukraine currently stand in terms of manpower?
Well, right now they have over 1 million personnel, if you include, the National Guard and other units. But numbers only tell part of the story, right? They're struggling to keep up with losses. And at the same time, they got to match Russia's growing military. It's a two-front battle, in a way. And this is where the Biden administration's suggestion is causing some friction, let's say.
Yeah, I was just going to get to that. The article mentions that the U.S. is pushing for Ukraine to lower its draft age from 25 to 18. I mean, that seems like a pretty big ask. Why is the U.S. pushing for this so hard?
Well, remember that quote from the White House spokesperson, manpower is the most vital need, right? This isn't just about weapon systems anymore. The U.S. is realizing that even with advanced weaponry, you need trained soldiers to actually use them effectively. It suggests, to me at least, a deeper commitment from the U.S. And it raises some concerns about, can this war effort really be sustained for the long haul?
It's a really interesting point because we've seen billions, literally billions, in aid poured into Ukraine. But now the focus seems to be on something way more fundamental, right? Like human resources.
Right.
How's Ukraine responding to all this pressure?
Well, they're not exactly thrilled. They're arguing that lowering the draft age isn't a magic solution.
Right.
They say they just don't have the equipment and the infrastructure to train and equip a huge wave of new recruits, even if they did have them, which they don't, right?
So it's not as simple as just throwing more bodies into the fight. It's about having like a whole system to prepare and support these soldiers.
Exactly. I mean, imagine trying to train and equip hundreds of thousands of new recruits while you're in the middle of a war.
It's insane.
Logistically, it's a nightmare, right? And Ukraine feels that, frankly, the West doesn't quite get it, doesn't get the reality on the ground.
And that's where this tension between Ukraine and its allies starts to like bubble up, right?
Yeah, for sure. The article quotes one Ukrainian official, and they're pretty skeptical. They see this push to lower the draft age as the West trying to avoid responsibility for their own delays in providing certain weapon systems, right? It shows you the difference in perspective. The U.S. is looking at like the big strategic chessboard, but Ukraine is dealing with, the very brutal realities of war every single day.
Yeah, so even with like shared goals, even when everyone wants the same outcome, there's still room for like disagreement and frustration.
Definitely.
And it seems like this manpower shortage has very real consequences on the ground too.
Yeah.
The article specifically mentioned the Kursk border region.
Yeah.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah. Kursk is a perfect example of how these manpower shortages have a real impact. Ukraine is struggling to, keep a strong presence there, and that's crucial for their defense strategy.
Big one.
And then to make things even more complicated, we have a new player entering the scene in this region, North Korea. North Korean troops in the Kursk region, that's a game changer. Adds a whole new layer of unpredictability to an already volatile situation.
I got to say, the whole North Korea thing, I did not see that coming. What's their role in all of this? It feels like we're suddenly back in like the Cold War or something
Yeah.
with these weird alliances and proxy conflicts.
Yeah, there are definitely some parallels there. It shows how regional rivalries, these ideological divides, they can still erupt into violence, even in, our globalized world. As for North Korea's role specifically, I mean, it's still a bit murky. One possibility is they're there to kind of shore up Russia's defenses,
Yeah.
Free up Russian troops for other operations.
So they're basically acting as like a human shield. But I mean, their involvement could go beyond just defense.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they could be involved in, more active stuff, sabotage missions, special operations, even cyber warfare. North Korea has a history of unconventional tactics, let's say. It's not out of the question that they might use them in this conflict.
That's a pretty disturbing thought.
Yeah.
What does this all tell us about the bigger picture? Like, what scenarios should we be prepared for?
Well, it underscores the fact that even conflicts that seem localized, right, they can have ripple effects across the globe, really. We need to be watching North Korea's intentions very closely and their capabilities, to understand how their presence might shift the balance of power in the region. And then, of course, there's always the risk of escalation.
Right, meaning if North Korean troops are actually fighting, really engaged in combat, it could pull other countries in, either on Ukraine's side or Russia's.
Exactly. And that raises the risk of miscalculations, unintended consequences, which could lead to, a much wider conflict. Maybe we can shift gears a bit here. Let's not forget about the human cost of this war. The pressure on Ukraine to, keep finding new soldiers is immense.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in, like, the strategic stuff,
Yeah.
And forget about the actual people whose lives are on the line. What are the long-term implications for Ukraine as a society?
Yeah.
They have to keep, finding more and more people to fight.
Well, long conflict, a war with, sustained casualties, that could be devastating. Think about the potential for demographic shifts, economic instability,
Yeah.
and, a whole generation that's deeply scarred by the trauma of war. And then there's the issue of morale, right? How long can you keep asking citizens to fight, especially when they see, the West hesitant to fully commit?
Which brings us back to that tension between Ukraine and its allies. It's not just about equipment delays. It's about a fundamental difference in perspective. Ukraine is literally fighting for its existence. They're facing the horrors of war every single day. Of course, they're going to be frustrated when they see, I don't know, a lack of urgency from their partners.
Yeah, of course. The U.S. is approaching this from, a strategic standpoint. They want to support Ukraine, but avoid getting directly involved. But for Ukraine, every delay could mean lives lost. That difference in perspective, it can really damage trust and weaken the whole effort.
So where do we go from here? What are the options, given all these like interconnected challenges?
Well, one option is for the U.S. and its allies to really step up their support, not just with weapons, but with training, logistical assistance, help Ukraine manage a larger force more effectively.
That sounds like a huge commitment, though. A massive investment of resources, potentially even, greater risk.
It is. It is. And it's not clear if there's the political will for that, especially with the change in U.S. leadership coming up. Another possibility is for Ukraine to, really focus on maximizing the effectiveness of their existing forces. Quality over quantity.
So like improving training,
Yeah.
adopting more flexible tactics,
Yeah.
using technology to, really enhance their capabilities.
Exactly. But even with those efforts, they're still going to be facing a numbers disadvantage against Russia, Ultimately, I think the most sustainable solution is a political one.
You mean like a negotiated settlement?
Yeah.
That addresses, the core issues that are driving this war.
Right. As long as both sides are committed to fighting, the demand for manpower is just going to keep growing, and the human cost will keep rising. Finding a path to peace, that's crucial, but it won't be easy.
No, peace means compromise. And right now, both sides seem pretty dug in. But even if a political solution feels, I don't know, far off, we can't ignore the immediate stuff. We've talked about the manpower crisis, the political tensions, the human toll, and this uncertain future.
And don't forget about North Korea. That's a wild card. This is a situation where every decision has huge consequences. It's a tangled web, really. But I think if we understand the different perspectives, the risks, all the factors at play, maybe we can start to navigate this uncertainty and hopefully contribute to finding a path towards peace, a just and lasting peace.
It feels like, the war in Ukraine,
That
it's entering this new phase. even more precarious.
Yeah.
The stakes are higher, the choices are tougher. We've talked about the immediate stuff like the manpower shortage, the pressure from the Biden administration, the strain on Ukrainian society is just, it's a lot. But I think what really strikes me is that underlying tension
Hmm.
between Ukraine and its allies.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. You have a country that's, I mean, they're fighting for their survival, desperate for any help they can get. And then you have these powerful allies, right,
Yep.
who are providing that support, but they also have their own interests to consider, their own risks. So, yeah, friction is bound to happen.
And we see that friction playing out in this whole debate over conscription, right? Ukraine feels like the West's push to lower the draft age. It's a way to like deflect, avoid responsibility for not giving them the weapons they need.
And I think there's some truth to that. The West has been hesitant to provide certain types of weapons,
Yeah.
especially, long-range missiles, the ones that could hit deep inside Russia. There's this fear, this constant fear of escalation, of triggering a much wider conflict.
But from Ukraine's point of view, if they don't have those weapons, they're fighting with, I mean, one hand tied behind their back, right?
Right.
They can't effectively counter Russia's firepower or deter them from, being even more aggressive.
It's a real catch-22. The West is worried about provoking Russia, but by holding back on certain weapons, they might actually be, making things worse, prolonging the conflict, maybe even emboldening Russia, finding the right balance. It's really tough.
So how do we break this stalemate? Is there even a solution?
I don't know if there's a clear solution. It's a delicate balancing act, weighing the risks of escalation against the need to give Ukraine the means to defend itself.
It seems like communication is key here. Open and honest communication
Yeah.
between Ukraine and its allies. I mean, to really push back against Russia, they need to be on the same page, right?
Yeah.
Strategically, tactically, all of it.
Absolutely. Trust is, I mean, it's the foundation of any alliance.
Yeah.
And that's especially true in a war. But as we all know, trust can be broken pretty easily.
Yeah. Misunderstandings, conflicting priorities, perceived betrayals even. It all adds up. And then, of course, we have this big question mark looming over everything, the change in U.S. leadership.
Yeah.
President-elect Trump has said he wants to end the war quickly. And he's not exactly, enthusiastic about the level of support the U.S. is giving Ukraine right now.
Yeah, that throws a wrench in the whole thing. Ukraine has come to rely heavily on the U.S. for military aid, for financial aid. And now, I mean, there's a chance that aid could be reduced or even cut off completely. It's a very uncertain situation for them.
They're caught in the middle of this geopolitical tug of war, and their fate is hanging in the balance. And we're not talking about, just territory or politics here. We're talking about the survival of a nation, the future of democracy in that part of the world.
It's a huge moment in history, and the decisions that are made in the next few months even, they'll have consequences for years to come. Wrapping up this deep dive, I have to say I do feel a sense of unease about the future, but also I'm in awe of the Ukrainian people, their resilience.
It's incredible what they've been through, the hardships, the losses, but they keep fighting for their freedom, for their future. It's really powerful. It says a lot about, I don't know, the human spirit.
The power of hope, the importance of community, that belief that, things can get better.
So as we move forward, I think it's really important to remember the human cost of this war and strive for a resolution that brings lasting peace and justice to Ukraine. A peace built on mutual respect, understanding, a shared commitment to a world where every nation can live in security and dignity. We've covered a lot of ground today, but as always, we want you to keep digging deeper. Imagine yourself in President Zelensky's shoes just for a moment, facing the demands of this war, the needs of your people. What decision would you make about conscription? It's a tough question. There are no easy answers, but it's something worth thinking about. Until next time, keep exploring. Stay curious.